Hi, I'm Althea. My family kicked me out of Thanksgiving because I fixed toilets for a living. Not because I did something wrong, not because I hurt anyone, because I wasn't presentable enough for Vera's colleagues, because my work boots didn't match their catered dinner. They sent me a polite lie, a rehearsed exclusion, and while they laughed around the table, I sat alone, gift basket untouched. But here's the part they didn't plan for. I bought the house they're renting. Now they pay rent to the daughter they tried to erase. But how did we get here? And what else did they never want you to know? 3 days before Thanksgiving, I wrapped up a plumbing job just before sundown. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Baldwin, lived 2 blocks from my workshop. Their kitchen sink had been leaking for weeks, and I'd finally gotten around to sealing it properly. As I handed over the invoice, I told them I was applying a holiday discount. Mrs. Baldwin smiled, squeezed my hand, and said, "People like you don't just fix homes, honey. You hold them together." Driving back, the cold air sliced through the truck's worn seals. The streets were lined with curled yellow leaves that looked tired of pretending it was still fall. I pulled into the lot behind my shop, where the back door led straight into my office, a space more organized than warm, but mine. On the wall, every permit and license was framed. The tools were lined up like soldiers. That night, I picked a bottle of Pinot Noir I'd been saving. It wasn't expensive, but it came from a vineyard a client once thanked me with. I wrapped it with twine and set it next to the gift basket I'd prepared, one small item for each person at the table. Vera loved peppermint bark. My father had a thing for imported mustard. Even my mother, though she'd never admit it, always reached for candied pecans. It took me 3 nights to put that basket together. My phone buzzed just as I was tying the last bow. "Hi, Mom," I said, bracing instinctively. There was a short silence. Then her voice came in, honeyed but tight. "Sweetheart, I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving." My hand paused midair. "Okay." "This year we're keeping things smaller, more formal." I waited. "Vera's hosting. She's invited some colleagues, and it'll just be immediate family." I blinked. "I'm immediate family." "Of course you are, darling," she added quickly. "It's just, well, we thought a less industrial look might be best for the photos." I didn't say anything, just stared at the basket. "It's not about you," she added, which, of course, meant it was absolutely about me. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Not really. After we hung up, I stood there for a while, still holding a spool of ribbon, like it meant something. Then I placed the basket gently by the door, not bothering to unpack it. An apple rolled out, hit the floor, and came to a stop near the fridge. A soft bruise bloomed on its skin almost instantly. I didn't pick it up. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen, phone glowing faintly beside my untouched cup of tea. I pulled up a picture from last Thanksgiving. We were all smiling. Vera was mid-toast. I was in the background, holding the pie I baked from scratch. That was before I became a liability to their image. This year, they didn't even pretend I mattered. Thanksgiving Day rolled in with a sky the color of tin and a wind that kept tugging at my coat collar. Still, I stood outside Vera's house, holding that same basket. I had added a fresh bottle of wine, just in case. I parked down the block to avoid looking like I was trying to make an entrance. The driveway was already packed with shiny sedans and polished SUVs, the kind that only came out for show. Music floated out through the windows, jazzy, curated, elegant, the kind of playlist Vera would call tastefully modern. I walked up the steps slowly, listening to the clinking of glasses and polite laughter behind the front door. My boots scuffed lightly on the frost-covered wood. I knocked once, then again. The door swung open, and there she was. Vera, flawless as ever in some silky blouse that probably cost more than my entire work wardrobe. "You actually came?" Her eyebrows lifted, then fell flat. "Althea, this really isn't the time." I kept my voice steady. "It's Thanksgiving. I brought wine, and the crumble Mom likes." She looked over her shoulder, as if making sure no one important had seen me. Then she leaned in, voice low. Look, we're trying to keep this professional. These people are partners. You showing up like this. Like this? I asked. Vera's smile didn't reach her eyes. Don't bring the scent of toilets into a catered dinner. These people are professionals, Al. For a moment, I couldn't tell if she realized what she had just said, or if she meant every word. Behind her, a few familiar faces turned toward the door. Aunt Lila, Cousin Tammy, even Mrs. Grant from 2 houses down. Their eyes flicked to me, then quickly looked away. Klein appeared just behind Vera. She didn't say a word. Her hand rested on the doorframe like it was the only thing holding her upright. Dad stood further back, hands in his pockets, saying nothing, as usual. I'll text you some leftovers, Vera said, her voice saccharine now. Just go. I placed the basket down gently, like setting something to rest. Then I turned and walked back toward my truck. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I didn't quicken my pace. My jaw tightened. My throat burned. Not because I was crying, I wasn't, but because I had never felt more invisible, standing directly in front of people who knew my name. Inside the truck, I sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. I didn't start the engine right away. I could still hear the laughter inside the house, muffled through double-paned glass. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Vera. Sorry, this is just how things have to be. Don't take it personally. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I pressed delete. No reply. Because by now, silence is easier to carry than forced grace. But what they don't see is, I've stopped fixing what doesn't want to be whole. By the time I got home that night, the streets were nearly empty. Porch lights glowed on timers, driveways sat quiet and full, and the world seemed oddly content without me in it. I parked out back, took the basket from the passenger seat, and walked inside without turning on the main light. Just the lamp over the sink, warm and low, the kind of light that makes silence feel heavier. The crumble I had baked 2 days ago sat lopsided in its container. I unwrapped the foil and placed it on a small plate, then poured a cup of coffee, even though it was past 11. The caffeine wouldn't matter. I wasn't going to sleep anytime soon. Steam rose, fogging the rim of the mug, and I found myself staring into it like there might be answers at the bottom. But there were none. Only that gnawing feeling in my chest that I didn't get left out. I got left behind. Out of habit, I checked my phone. No messages, no calls. Just a feed full of smiles, matching napkins, and polished centerpieces. Vera posted a video of her carving the turkey. Klein laughed in the background, holding a wine glass like it was a trophy. Someone had tagged her. Best hostess ever. No one mentioned me, not even once. I put the phone down and looked around the kitchen. I'd built every shelf, installed every hinge, wired the fixtures with my own hands. And yet, somehow, the people I came from still didn't see this as success. Just a phase, a trade, something temporary until I figured life out. The memory hit hard. I hadn't meant to think about it, but there it was. Mrs. Langley, my neighbor, just 3 days earlier. She'd called about a leak under her sink, nothing major. 10 minutes work, tops. As I wiped my hands on a towel, she chuckled. You know, she said, your mother once told me you had more tools than textbooks. She laughed, not mean exactly, just matter of fact. But hey, at least you're handy, right? At the time, I smiled, said nothing. Now, in my kitchen, the words clung to the walls like smoke. She's only good with pipes. It wasn't just Vera. It wasn't even just my mom. It was a tone, a shared understanding passed between neighbors and cousins, and even strangers, that the work I did was practical, but not presentable. I leaned back in my chair, the vinyl creaking underneath me, and let my mind drift further back, to the middle school fair when I was 12. They needed volunteers for setup, and one of the outdoor hoses had burst the night before. I didn't think twice. I grabbed a wrench from my backpack and fixed it before anyone noticed. But they did notice. By lunchtime, I was plumber baby. The kids thought it was hilarious. One even drew a doodle of me with a toilet wrench for a nose and passed it around during math. I held it together until the final bell, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron. What stayed with me wasn't the drawing. It wasn't even the name. It was my mother's laugh. She was chaperoning that day. When another mom mentioned the joke, she laughed and said, "She is a little plumber, isn't she?" I remember standing behind her, still holding the wrench, and thinking, if she laughs, then maybe it's okay. Maybe they're not laughing at me, they're laughing with her. But they weren't, and I never forgot. Even when she did. Eventually, I pushed the plate away and walked out to the shed behind my house. The cold bit through my sleeves, but I didn't care. I opened the creaky door and stepped inside, surrounded by shelves of tools, bolts, wiring kits, all organized, all used, all earned. On the back wall, there was a mirror above the workbench. A small one, just enough to check safety goggles or make sure I didn't walk into a client's house with grease on my chin. I looked at myself, not 12, not ashamed. I reached for the side of the bench, where old stickers clung like badges. One read, "Union Proud," another, "Skilled, Not Settling." They were chipped, some faded, but I remembered when I put each one there. Every job, every certification, every early morning and late night stacked into the person looking back at me. "They laughed when I fixed things," I said quietly. "Now they break me just to see if I still will." I didn't turn the shed light off right away. I stood there a little longer, hand resting on the workbench, watching my breath cloud up in the cold air. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to make the roof creak. It reminded me I hadn't sealed that back corner before the last rain. Maybe tomorrow, or maybe not. For once, it didn't feel urgent to fix anything. I locked up, walked back into the house, and hung my coat by the door. The thermostat blinked 64. I let it stay there. I wasn't looking for comfort tonight. I just needed quiet. Back in the kitchen, I stood at the counter and poured the cold coffee down the sink. The apple from the Thanksgiving basket was still bruised and sagging on the floor near the fridge. I picked it up, tossed it into the trash, and wiped my hands on a dish towel that still had last week's grease on it. My eyes landed on my laptop. It sat closed next to a stack of bills and a notebook filled with sketches for the new service van layout I'd been putting off. I opened the screen, tapped the trackpad, and waited as the light glowed back to life. Out of habit, I checked the real estate site I used when scoping investment properties for clients. The same one Vera once mocked me for using. "You're not a realtor, Althea," she'd said, laughing into her wine glass. "Stay in your lane. You fix pipes, not portfolios." But the thing about staying in your lane is, it only makes sense if someone else isn't constantly pushing you into the shoulder. I typed in our childhood zip code. Dozens of listings popped up. Condos, duplexes, fixer-uppers. I scrolled past most of them, then paused. There it was. The address sat like a brick in my throat. The house my parents were renting. The same one Vera hosted that glossy Thanksgiving dinner in. The one I used to sleep in during summer visits, back when things still felt like family. For sale by owner, I clicked. 2-bedroom, 2-bath, decent yard. The listing photos were fresh, furniture still in place, dining room table still set, same runner rug by the fireplace. Asking price was modest, likely to move quickly. I reread the details 3 times before leaning back in my chair. They were still renting, still in a house that wasn't theirs. But what if it could be mine? I stood up and paced a bit, ran my hand through my hair. I wasn't being petty. This wasn't revenge. This was logistics, a rare opportunity. That house meant something to them, clearly. To Vera, especially. And now it was on the market. Maybe it was time the house belonged to someone who understood what it took to hold something together, not just host inside it. The next morning, I called the seller. An older man named Richard, who was relocating to Arizona to be near his daughter. He sounded exhausted, but kind. "Cash buyer?" he asked after a few minutes of small talk. "Yes, sir." "Quick close?" "If you want it." We scheduled a walkthrough for Thursday. He said the current tenants were on a flexible lease and hadn't expressed interest in purchasing. I kept my voice measured. Understood. I won't disrupt anything until you've moved forward. Appreciate that, he said. After hanging up, I sat there with my phone in my hand, thinking about how many years I'd spent trying to get invited into that house. Maybe I didn't need the invitation. Maybe I just needed the deed. I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Business Matters. Inside were bank statements, property files, pre-approval letters. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. Every repair job, every emergency call at 2 a.m., every thankless afternoon under a crawl space, those had stacked up to something. I clicked open a document draft I'd started months ago for a property LLC. The name I'd typed half-jokingly back then stared back at me. Knox Holdings. I changed it. Practical Roots Property, LLC. Clean. Quiet. Undeniable. I filled in the blanks, printed the initial paperwork, then stood, stretched, and walked over to my window. Across the street, lights glowed from the front of the house. Klein's silhouette passed by the dining room. They had no idea I was about to become their landlord, and I wouldn't need an invitation to walk through that door ever again. By Thursday afternoon, the ground under them would quietly belong to me. I spent that Monday exactly the way I needed to. Practical, efficient, deliberate. I opened the shop early, caught up on service logs, and made a round of follow-up calls to clients waiting on parts. While the kettle warmed on the hot plate in my office, I refreshed the listing. Still up, still mine for the taking. The address blinked at me like a dare. Same house, same crooked porch step, same garden gnome Vera used to make fun of when we were kids, said it looked like it drank too much. I clicked Request Showing, filled in the form with my LLC details, and hit send. By 10, I was on the phone with the seller. Mr. Holland answered on the second ring. His voice sounded tired but kind, the way some men sound after they've decided life isn't going to give them many surprises anymore. You looking to live in it or invest? Investment, I said. Rental purposes. Cash close. No broker. He chuckled. That's music to my ears. My daughter's been nagging me to get down to Tempe before my knees freeze off. We talked logistics. He told me the tenants were on a month-to-month lease and hadn't shown any interest in buying. Nice ladies, he said. Quiet, pay on time, but not exactly planting roots. I kept my tone even. Understood. I won't disrupt anything while we handle the paperwork. We scheduled the inspection for Thursday at 3. I thanked him, hung up, and set the calendar reminder immediately. There was no space for emotion, just steps. Clear, measured steps. I closed the office, climbed into my truck, and drove to the bank. 30% down wasn't nothing, but I'd earned it the hard way. I'd lived lean, skipped vacations, worked weekends and nights, and built my credit score like it was a second spine. I slid my business debit card across the counter and asked for a certified check. The teller glanced at the LLC name. Property firm? She asked. New division, I said, smiling. Back home, I opened the folder with the zoning maps and local tax codes. No liens, clean title. I scanned the previous tenant history. Short term, low risk. If I wanted, I could flip the place in under 6 months for profit. But that wasn't the plan. The plan wasn't even revenge. Not exactly. It was reclamation. For every family dinner I wasn't invited to. Every email they forgot to copy me on. Every time Vera introduced me as my sister who does maintenance or something. For every moment I pretended not to care, because it was easier than showing how much I actually did. I opened my email settings and updated my signature line. Althea Knox owner. Practical Roots Property, LLC. I paused for a moment, then added, serving homes with more integrity than the ones I was raised in. Then I backspaced the second line and left it simple. Clean. That night, I didn't cook. I didn't clean. I pulled a pre-made meal from the freezer, heated it in the oven, and ate standing at the counter. The air smelled faintly of solder and old wood, the scent that always clung to me, no matter how hard I scrubbed. I glanced toward the window again. The house across the street sat lit like a catalog spread. I saw movement behind the curtains. Klein, probably adjusting the blinds, maybe pacing like she always did when she couldn't sleep. They were inside, still safe, still oblivious. And I was outside, no longer knocking, no longer asking for a place at their table. I had other plans now. I closed the window, turned off the kitchen light, and carried the inspection packet to my bedroom. It was time to rest. There were signatures to gather, inspections to pass, and keys to collect. And no one was going to see me coming. They expected a landlord. They'll get a reckoning. Thursday came colder than the forecast had predicted. The air had that dry bite, the kind that worked its way through wool and made your knuckles ache. I was in the lawyer's office by 1:45, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. My name wasn't on any visible page, just the company name, Practical Roots Property, LLC. Clean, quiet, untraceable. Unless you were looking hard. The wire transfer cleared at 2:42. The attorney looked at me over her glasses and said, "Congratulations, Miss Knox. You just bought yourself a very complicated piece of peace." I smiled and replied, "It's not revenge, it's closure, with a view." Keys would be dropped off on Monday. The seller was heading to Arizona that same weekend. No delays, no red tape, just signatures and silence. By 4, the tenants had been officially notified. A letter, legally worded and certified, mailed and hand-delivered. Subject line, change in ownership, lease reevaluation. I'd worked with my attorney to keep the tone neutral, sterile, unshakable. There would be a meeting, Monday, on site. That evening, I parked a few houses down and watched through my rearview as Vera walked out to the mailbox in heels too high for frost. She opened the letter slowly, like it might be a holiday card. Her face didn't change much, but she stood there longer than necessary. I imagined the gears turning. Inside, she probably handed it to Klein. Maybe they read it together. Maybe one of them said, "We should have bought this place when we had the chance." But they hadn't. And now it belonged to the girl they'd left off the guest list. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from a blocked number. "This is Vera Calloway. We received some sort of notice from PR Property. I assume it's a mistake. We'd like clarification." She didn't say thank you. She didn't ask politely. Just assumed someone would call her back, because that's how her world had always worked. I didn't respond. On Sunday, I walked by the house just before sunset. Porch light on, same cracked rail. The wind had pulled one of the patio cushions loose, and it lay on the steps like it had been dropped mid-conversation. I paused at the edge of the yard, not out of hesitation, but to check the seal along the foundation. Still holding. I leaned slightly, folded a note, and slid it into their mailbox. Meeting scheduled, Monday, 10 a.m. sharp. PRP. I didn't sign my name, just the initials of the company they thought was some faceless firm. I turned and walked back to my truck. The streetlights were starting to hum to life, casting long shadows across driveways that hadn't changed in years. That night, I laid out my clothes for the meeting. Not overalls, not the canvas jacket I used for crawl spaces. Just a tailored coat, clean boots, simple makeup, enough to look like someone who knew what ownership meant. I placed the property folder in my leather satchel, checked the clasp, checked it again. The next morning would be business, but for me, it was personal. Because I've spent years fixing broken things. Family dinners, hollow birthdays, forgotten phone calls. I used to think if I just tried hard enough, stayed useful, showed up early, they'd eventually see me. But they didn't. And now, I get to decide what stays and what gets replaced. They expected a landlord. They'll get a reckoning. I arrived at exactly 9:58, not early enough to look eager, not late enough to be disrespectful, just enough to remind them that I understood time and how not to waste it. My boots clicked softly on the concrete as I walked up the steps, clean, polished, not the steel-toed ones. I carried only one thing, the folder. When Klein opened the door, Her face didn't flicker with recognition. She gave me the once-over, like I was there to fix a leak. "Well, that was fast," she said, not even hiding the smirk. "Back toilet's been acting up. You might want to take a look before we talk lease stuff." I didn't answer. Just walked past her and into the house that now legally belonged to me. The living room looked like time had paused somewhere around 2006. Same throw pillows, same heavy drapes, same scent of overused candles and polite tension. I laid the folder on the coffee table, opened it to the signed deed, and waited. Vera stepped into the room, phone in hand, still in a silk blouse like she was on break from a photo shoot. She froze. "You!" Her voice cracked. I looked up. "This is the title. That's the LLC. And this," I said, tapping the page, "is my signature." Klein blinked. "What is this?" "She bought it," Vera whispered, barely above a breath. "Mom, she bought the house." You could have heard a pin drop between that couch and the fireplace. Klein sat slowly, like her knees gave out all at once. "I don't understand," she said. "No," I replied. "You never really did." They didn't speak for a while, and I didn't fill the silence. I just let it settle in the room, heavy and undeniable. "I suppose you want to raise the rent," Klein finally muttered, still avoiding my eyes. "Not today," I said. "But I want this meeting on record. New lease terms, new owner. You'll be dealing directly with me." Vera stood up, grabbed her phone, and walked out of the room without another word. By late afternoon, I got the notification. She had posted a story online, a photo of a fancy place setting, and the caption, "Some people value revenge more than family. Some people forget where they come from." I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. The internet did it for me. A neighbor replied under the post, "Didn't she pay your HVAC bill last winter?" Another, "Funny how folks who do the work are only embarrassing until the pipes burst." And then someone shared a screenshot of my business card. Practical Roots Property, owned and operated by Althea Knox. The comments exploded. Vera took the post down within the hour. But by then, it had already been archived, passed around, screenshotted, dissected. I didn't respond. Not to the text from Vera that said, "We need to talk." Not to the voicemail Klein left asking if we could discuss things face to face like adults. I didn't need their explanations. I'd heard enough already, just never when it mattered. Odile sent me a screenshot of the original post, with a simple message. "You did that." I replied, "Let them speak. They're finally saying enough." I turned off my phone and got back to sketching out the new HVAC layout for the office expansion. Work made more sense than their chaos ever had. Later that evening, as I made tea, an email pinged. Subject: Request for lease renegotiation. Urgent. I didn't open it. Just read the subject line, then closed the laptop. Instead, I walked to the whiteboard in my office and added a sticky note next to the others. It read, "Silence is also a decision." Now I just enforce contracts. Friday arrived with that blinding kind of winter sun that makes everything look clearer than it really is. The house looked the same from the outside. Same flaking paint around the trim, same cracks in the walkway, but everything inside that structure had shifted. I parked a block away, not out of fear, just preference. It felt cleaner to arrive under my own terms, not in front of prying neighbors who'd already heard the whispers. I carried the folder in my left hand, a small satchel in the other, with nothing but copies, deed, lease, and one pen. When I knocked, it was Klein who answered. Her eyes flicked down at my shoes, my blazer, my posture. She stepped aside with that performative courtesy she'd used all her life. "I hope this won't take long," she said. "We've got plans this evening." I walked past her like I'd done it 100 times. But today, I wasn't visiting. I was arriving. The dining room was staged, almost theatrically. The lights were warm, too bright for daytime. A teapot steamed gently on a sideboard, like we were preparing for civil discussion. Vera stood behind a chair, phone still in her hand, mouth tight. Klein gestured toward the table. So, what is it you want? I placed the folder down and opened it. Slowly, deliberately. The top page bore the title, Transfer, Notarized and Final. This is not about want, I said. This is what is. Vera shifted. You came to gloat. I slid the lease across the table. I came to do business. Vera glanced at the paperwork, then back at me. You think this makes you somebody? I didn't blink. You called me a plumber, like it was a punchline. Now you rent the toilet from me. Klein's face flushed. You're humiliating your own family. No, I said. I'm just reading aloud what you chose not to acknowledge. Silence blanketed the room like snow. Cold, quiet, undeniable. I pulled out a pen, uncapped it, and signed the updated lease right in front of them. Full name, Althea Knox. No initials. No hiding behind a company anymore. Vera's knuckles whitened around the back of the chair. You think this makes you better than us? I looked her in the eye. Not better. Free! Klein took the lease with trembling hands, folded it again, as if she could crease the truth out of it. They didn't argue further, didn't apologize either. But I didn't expect that. This wasn't a scene built for drama, it was a table built for truth. I left without raising my voice, without waiting for them to escort me to the door. I didn't slam it behind me. I didn't need to. Outside, the sun caught the front window just right. I stopped at the end of the walkway, glanced back. Not at them, not even at the house, but at the angle of light across the shingles. 17 years old. That was the first time I'd fixed a roof solo. A client in Pine Ridge. She'd paid in cash and cookies. I'd worked 3 weekends to finish it. No one clapped. No one posted about it. But the roof held. Back then, I fixed leaks to earn respect. Now, I just enforce contracts. And for once, I knew they'd feel the silence more than I ever felt their words. 3 days passed with barely a word spoken out loud in my office. Not because there wasn't noise, but because none of it needed to be said. I focused on what I'd always done best: execution, deadlines, deliverables. My crew needed a new materials schedule for the municipal building project, and I delivered it ahead of time. I stayed later to review a redesign for a client's basement furnace that had warped from years of DIY neglect. While my phone buzzed, vibrated, blinked in the corner like a toddler begging for attention, I let it rest face down. Every notification that appeared only confirmed what I already knew. Desperation was loud, especially when entitlement realized it no longer had a key. By noon Wednesday, my inbox was a pile of guilt-wrapped demands. 14 missed calls from Klein, 9 texts from Vera, 3 voicemails from Gideon, each more unsteady than the last. The final text from Vera simply read, "Is this really how you want to be remembered in this family?" I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the question already admitted its own guilt. Instead, I opened my laptop and finalized the schematic for a commercial HVAC retrofit. Something measurable, something that made sense. My calendar was full, my team was efficient, my work had integrity, my family had panic. Klein had apparently called the title office. I knew this because the paralegal emailed me a heads up. Your mother left a message asking if the deed was reversible. We, of course, told her the answer was no. She didn't take it well. Vera had apparently reached out to the original seller, asking if there had been a mistake. His lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, responded on record. All documents were reviewed, signed, and notarized properly. There is no legal basis for reversal. And Gideon, well, he tried. His first voicemail was calm, nostalgic even. I just think maybe there's a way to fix this. We're still family. The second was less sure. I don't know what your mother said, but we can't keep living under this tension. The third? Althea, you've made your point. Now what? I hit delete midway through. It wasn't spite, it was self-preservation. They had built walls with silence, distance, and avoidance. Now, I was simply choosing not to knock anymore. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and opened a spreadsheet. Payroll, insurance premiums, real-world things, things that never lied. At 6:37 p.m., just as I was getting ready to leave the office, something slid under the door. A faint shuffling sound. I paused, waited 5 seconds, then walked over. A letter, handwritten, no envelope, no name on the outside. I didn't pick it up right away. I just stood there, staring at it like it might explode. Eventually, I leaned down, lifted the page. The handwriting was Klein's. I could tell by the way the Y curled too tightly and the T never got crossed all the way. I didn't read it, not yet. I walked to the whiteboard near my desk, stuck it there with a magnet. They could write it down if they needed to, but I would decide if it ever got read aloud. I locked the office behind me, walked out into the crisp air, and breathed deeply. This wasn't peace exactly, but it was distance, and distance, I'd learned, was sometimes the only boundary anyone respected. And maybe now they'd read it, not out of love, but respect. That was enough. The morning of the contract signing came without ceremony. No applause, no bright skies, just another gray December Thursday with frost on my windshield and grit in the streets. I liked it that way. It matched my mood. Grounded, sober, focused. I parked outside the development firm's office, a modern building wrapped in glass and intention. Inside, I was met by a project coordinator who looked young enough to be my niece. She offered coffee, smiled too much, and led me to a conference room where a long table sat surrounded by people in tailored blazers and polished shoes. This time, I didn't feel out of place. I sat at the far end, laid out the documents I'd reviewed 4 times already, and waited. When the developer entered, a man in his 50s with a handshake firm enough to mean business, he said, "Glad we could get this done before the holidays." He tapped the folder. "Your reputation precedes you, Althea. Quiet, efficient, no drama." I gave a polite nod. That's the plan. Another man, an investor I hadn't met before, leaned back and said, "Most people in your position would have gone online, called out your family by name, lit it all up." I shrugged. Most people aren't trying to build something that lasts. He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. Not really. They handed me the pen. I signed the deal. The contract made me the sole HVAC provider for their new eco-housing project. It was big, bigger than anything I'd touched before. Long-term work, a team expansion, more security than I'd ever been handed by anyone who shared my blood. The article went live the next day. From pipe fittings to property power moves, the quiet rise of Althea Knox. I didn't read it. Odile did. She texted me a quote and added, "They used to call you the quiet one. Now they just call you ma'am." I smiled. Not because I needed praise, but because someone who mattered had noticed. Flowers arrived from a client, one I hadn't worked with in months. "Proud to have known you before the headlines," the note read. I kept it pinned beside my office calendar. Later that week, the high school down the road invited me to speak at their vocational day. Me. The girl who once hid her calloused hands in her jacket sleeves during parent-teacher night. I said yes. That weekend, I opened a folder on my computer I hadn't touched in years. It was labeled Foundations. Inside were scanned images of my first certifications: water heater repair, ductwork diagnostics, electrical troubleshooting. The timestamps were ridiculous. One was signed at 2:14 a.m. There were grainy photos of my first solo jobs, a basement furnace, a school janitor's supply closet. I remembered sweating through borrowed overalls, hoping the client didn't notice my hands shaking. And then, the spreadsheet. I clicked it open. Top line, $142.16, week 1 balance. Next to it, don't quit. I hadn't. They thought I had luck. I had blueprints and blisters. Now, when I walk into a room, people don't ask, "Who's she with?" They ask, "Is she available?" Recognition doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's in the way a neighbor tips his hat and says, Didn't know you owned that whole row. Good for you, Althea. Or when a stranger walks into the shop and says, I read about you. You ever do residential? For the first time, my name feels right. It's not an afterthought at the dinner table. It's not missing from a holiday card. It's not whispered at the back of a family gathering with a tone of embarrassment. It's on deeds, on contracts, on company headers and tax filings. It's mine. I stepped outside and rehung the sign on the front of my office. Knox Systems. Owned. Operated. Engineered by a woman with hands and vision. I stood back, let the winter air bite my cheeks, and looked across the street. The house stood still, pristine on the outside, hollow on the inside. A perfect shell for the image they tried so hard to protect. Some people chase the family name. I turned mine into a title. And when the next message came from them, I didn't shake. I just read. Sunday moved slow, the kind of quiet day where the clock seems to stretch itself thin. I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee, bundled in an old flannel, watching the neighborhood carry on like nothing had ever been broken. And maybe for them, nothing had. But for me, everything had been rebuilt. My phone buzzed on the railing next to me. A photo from Odile. It was the house we used to sneak into during high school. The one with the broken fence and empty porch swing. Below it, a simple line. I'm proud of you, not because of the house, but because you never let them redefine you. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. I started to type a reply, then deleted it. Instead, I just sent a heart. Some victories didn't need a monologue. They just needed someone to witness them. Inside, I pulled out a bin of winter gear from the closet. Buried beneath scarves and a pair of snow boots was a box of Christmas decorations I hadn't touched in years. I opened the lid, brushing off dust that carried the weight of a dozen silent Decembers. The tiny brass wrench lay wrapped in tissue at the bottom. Odile had given it to me 5 years ago. Because you always fix things, she'd said, even when no one's watching. I left it where it was. For now. Upstairs, I stepped out onto the roof from my bedroom window, something I hadn't done in months. The sealant I'd applied in the fall still held. I ran my hand along the edge where the flashing met the shingles, checking for moisture. All good. Years ago, I'd offered to do the same at the house where Vera and Klein lived. The gutters were sagging, the flashing was peeling, and I had just gotten my first roofing certification. I'd been proud, more than proud. I'd wanted them to see that. I stood at the base of the ladder and said, I can handle it. I know what I'm doing. Vera had laughed. You're not climbing up there. You'll break something. Klein hadn't even looked up from her crossword. Let Gideon handle it. This isn't your little toolbox fantasy. So I left, drove across town, bought shingles, practiced on the duplex I was managing for a client who didn't care how many times I messed up, as long as the rent checks cleared. No one clapped then, either. But that roof still didn't leak. They never knew I rebuilt what they wouldn't let me touch. Back on solid ground, I pulled out a small fake tree from the hall closet. It was half the size of the ones in store windows and missing a few needles, but it stood straight. I decorated it in silence. No holiday music, no spice cider, no trying to summon a mood that didn't exist. I hung a few plain ornaments, nothing matching. At the very end, I unwrapped the brass wrench and placed it dead center. I stepped back. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't festive, but it was mine. No one had to show up, no one had to validate it. This space, this version of December, belonged to me. That afternoon, I sorted through the junk drawer in the kitchen. Old receipts, paper clips, 2 batteries I didn't trust. At the bottom, I found a card from 2 years ago. No signature, just a typed message. You are stronger than you think, even when they try to prove otherwise. I'd kept it without knowing why. Now I knew. No one called that Sunday. No one knocked. And I didn't expect them to. But for the first time, their absence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. You can love people, I whispered to myself, and still lock your front door. The lights on the tree blinked slow and steady in the corner, casting soft glows across the living room walls. I had no intention of hosting anyone, but something about the ritual, unboxing, plugging in, letting it shine, made the space feel claimed. That morning, I'd cleaned the gutters myself, not because they needed it urgently, but because it felt good to do something just for me. One of the corner tiles had shifted slightly in last week's wind. I reseated it, tightened the brackets, ran my glove over the metal to feel for lift. You do the job once and right, and it holds. The mail came late, close to 5. I heard the truck long before I saw the envelope. Small, white, no return address again. I didn't even have to open it to know who had sent it. But this time I did. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, emotionless. We regret how things unfolded. We hope someday you'll understand it wasn't personal. Families are complicated. If you're willing to talk, we're willing to listen. No names, no signatures, just an invitation in the vaguest, safest terms. I folded the letter once, then again, and slipped it into a drawer with spare fuses and a flashlight I hadn't used in a year. And that was the end of that. I didn't answer, didn't need to. Instead, I made dinner. Simple, roasted vegetables and leftover chicken, eaten over the sink. The way I always did when the silence wasn't something to fill, but something to appreciate. Later that night, I sat at the table with the toolbox I inherited from an old contractor friend who passed years ago. Inside were a few tools I hadn't used in ages, and one I still used every week. A flathead screwdriver, with initials scratched into the handle. I took it out, cleaned it carefully, then carried it to the hallway. At the far end of the wall, between 2 framed inspection certificates and a photo of my first shop, I hung a shadow box. Inside, the screwdriver, the brass wrench Odile gave me, and a copy of the deed. No plaque, no explanation, just proof. I turned out the lights except for the tree, sat down on the couch, pulled the blanket up over my knees, and exhaled. This year, there were no place cards, no forced laughs, no navigating landmines disguised as polite questions. There was space, warmth, my name on the door. I don't know if they'll ever come around, not really. And if they do, I don't know if it'll matter anymore. What I know is this. I built something, with my hands, my money, my mistakes, my will. I made something out of nothing. And if that isn't family legacy, I don't know what is. Outside, across the street, their porch light flickered. No one came out. No one waved. The house looked the same. But I didn't. I used to patch the places they cracked, I whispered. Now I only build where it's safe to stay.